Darren Cole trusted Elise Monroe with everything: his house, his fortune, his future. But when he walked out of prison 6 years later, she was living in a car, the money was gone, and one man was already dead. What happened in those missing years unraveled a chilling story of betrayal, stolen millions, and a vanishing act that ended in silence and blood. In 2017, Darren Cole was at the peak of his success. He lived in Phoenix, Arizona, in a sleek modern house that overlooked the desert hills. He drove a black electric sports car, wore designer watches, and had a digital currency consulting firm that brought in millions. Darren had built everything from scratch, starting in his early 20s. He wasn't flashy by nature, but his success drew attention. He spoke at tech conferences, appeared on finance podcasts, and built a quiet reputation as one of the sharpest minds in cryptocurrency investment. He met Elise Monroe at a networking event 2 years before everything changed. She was calm, thoughtful, and had a smile that made people lean in when she talked. Unlike others drawn to Darren's wealth, Elise didn't seem impressed by his money. She talked about starting a nonprofit one day and moving to the Pacific Northwest to live off the grid. Darren found her refreshing. They began dating, and within a year, she had moved into his home. A few months later, they were engaged. Darren trusted her completely. But things began to shift quickly in late 2016. Darren's business had grown too fast. He had accepted capital from private investors without securing all the proper licenses. The cryptocurrency world was still murky, and regulations were just starting to catch up. One of his former associates, a man named Jeremy Quinn, had been fired over a dispute about asset transparency. Jeremy had connections, and he used them. In early 2017, Darren's world collapsed in a matter of hours. At 5:43 a.m. on a Thursday, a team of federal agents stormed into his home. Elise was asleep. Darren was handcuffed in his kitchen. Computers were seized. Storage drives disappeared into sealed evidence bags. The charges came fast: wire fraud, operating an unlicensed securities platform, and money laundering. Darren was stunned. He knew he'd walked a legal gray line, but he never imagined this. His trial lasted less than 3 weeks. The prosecution painted him as a modern-day con artist, convincing small investors to hand over life savings in exchange for promises of digital wealth. Darren argued that it was all above board, that clients knew the risks, and that many had turned huge profits. But it didn't matter. The paper trail was messy, and his old associate testified against him in exchange for immunity. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. In the days before his incarceration, Darren made a critical decision. He gave Elise full legal power of attorney, control over all of his assets, and the deed to the house. He believed it was the right thing to do. He trusted her to protect everything he'd built until he returned. They had tearful goodbyes. Elise promised to wait for him. Darren believed her. There was no prenup, no backup plan, no second thoughts. He truly believed love and loyalty would carry them through. Darren entered prison as a wealthy man on paper, but a powerless one in every other way. He tried to settle into his new life behind bars, focusing on routine, reading, and maintaining his sanity. At first, Elise wrote often. Her letters were warm, filled with updates on the house, news from the outside, and small reminders of hope. But as months passed, the letters slowed. By the 3rd year, they stopped entirely. Darren held on to the belief that Elise was just overwhelmed, that life on the outside was hard, and that she'd be there when he walked free. What he didn't know was that the life he had left behind was slowly unraveling, and that the woman he loved was no longer waiting for him, but running from something far worse. When Darren finally stepped out of the prison gates in early 2023, the world felt different. The air was colder, the streets seemed louder, and the sky somehow looked less blue than he remembered. He had served his 6-year sentence quietly, without incident, and with one thing in mind: reclaiming the life he left behind. He had built that life piece by piece, and even though it had crumbled during his time away, he believed he could put it back together. At the very least, he thought he still had his home, and perhaps Elise. The ride back to Phoenix was quiet. He stayed with a friend of a friend for a night, then made his way to what used to be his neighborhood. The once familiar streets brought back memories: morning jogs, summer barbecues, quiet evenings on the patio. But when he reached the top of the hill, something was off. The lawn was overgrown, the driveway was cracked, and the windows were boarded up. A rusted chain wrapped around the front gate, sealed with a padlock. On the door was a faded foreclosure notice from over 2 years ago. The house he left behind had been repossessed and abandoned, the same house he had signed over to Elise for safekeeping. He stood in front of the gate for a long time, trying to make sense of it. His mind raced. Had she sold it? Was it stolen? Had she vanished? He reached out to his lawyer, who hadn't spoken to Elise in years. A financial check showed that every account tied to Darren, savings, stocks, digital wallets, had been drained within the first year of his sentence. Nearly $2 million gone. No trace of where it had gone or when. It didn't take long to realize that Elise hadn't just disappeared. She had erased herself. No active address, no current phone number, and not even a social media presence. It was as if she had folded her life inward and vanished. Darren began searching obsessively. He contacted shelters, ran background checks, followed credit card trails. After weeks of digging, a tip from a local outreach center finally pointed him to a parking lot outside a Walmart, 40 miles from where their home once stood. There, tucked between 2 shopping carts and an old RV, was a silver Honda Civic. Inside, asleep in the passenger seat, was Elise. She looked nothing like the woman he remembered. Her hair was unwashed, her face pale and thin, and her clothes looked like she'd been wearing them for weeks. Her entire life was packed into the back seat: a few bags, some blankets, and an empty fast food cup. Elise had been living out of her car for more than a year. The staff at a nearby church told him she rarely spoke to anyone, only showed up to shower or grab donated food. She moved her car every few days, never stayed in one place long. Her eyes darted whenever someone walked by. She looked haunted, not like someone who had betrayed a man and run off with a fortune, but like someone who had seen something they couldn't unsee. Darren didn't confront her, not right away. He watched from a distance. It didn't make sense. If she had stolen everything, where was it? Where was the money? The house was gone, the accounts were empty, and Elise looked like she hadn't touched a dime in years. Nothing about it added up. What he expected to be a story of betrayal began to twist into something else, something darker. Elise hadn't just disappeared to escape guilt. She had disappeared because she was terrified of something, and Darren was about to learn that the real danger wasn't just what she had done, but what, or who, she had tried to run from. Darren couldn't get Elise out of his mind. The image of her curled up in the passenger seat of that Civic haunted him. This wasn't the life of someone who had stolen millions and vanished into luxury. It was the life of someone in hiding. But hiding from what, or whom, he didn't yet know. He needed answers, and no matter how broken she seemed, he had to hear the truth from her. He returned to the parking lot a few days later. Elise was still there, her car now parked near the edge of the lot beneath a flickering streetlight. Darren approached cautiously. She looked up as he neared, her eyes wide with disbelief, then panic. She didn't speak. Instead, she got out of the car, walked a few feet away, and sat on the curb with her back to him. Darren didn't follow. He stood at a distance, waiting. Eventually, she began to talk, not to him directly, but as if speaking to the air around her. Her words came slowly, disjointed, but clear enough to understand. After his arrest, Elise said she had been lost. At first, she believed he'd come home soon, that the case would be dropped or overturned. She tried to hold on to everything, the house, the accounts, the investments. But she didn't know how to manage that kind of money. She was overwhelmed, lonely, and angry. She started visiting casinos to escape, just for an hour or two at a time. But the thrill took hold. She won big early on, which only made it worse. Her gambling escalated quickly. Within 6 months, she had lost more than $500,000. To cover her losses, she sold the luxury car Darren had left behind, then took out loans using the house as collateral. Soon after, she met a man named Vincent Lowe. He was charming, confident, and seemed to understand the danger she was in. He offered help, said he had friends who could loan her money, clean up her mess, even help her disappear for a while if she needed to. Desperate and terrified, she agreed. That was her biggest mistake. Vincent wasn't just a smooth talker. He was connected to people who didn't take debt lightly. Elise used what remained of Darren's accounts to pay back what she could, but it was never enough. The people Vincent worked for weren't bankers. They were enforcers. She said she was followed, threatened, watched. Her phone was tapped. Strangers appeared near the house. They wanted everything: money, assets, control. So she gave it to them. The house was sold to a shell company for cash. Every bank account was drained and transferred. Even Darren's cryptocurrency holdings were accessed, converted, and funneled through dozens of anonymous wallets. Elise signed documents she didn't understand. By the time she realized what was happening, everything was gone. Then Vincent vanished. She was left with nothing, and the people he worked for still wanted more. Elise tried to run. She changed phones, cut ties, and lived out of cheap motels until the money ran out. When there was nothing left, she moved into her car. She'd been doing it ever since, hiding in plain sight, never staying anywhere too long, always expecting someone to come knocking. Darren stood still, absorbing every word. It was hard to know what to believe. Parts of her story made sense. Others felt too convenient. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a failed relationship or stolen money. Elise had fallen into something far beyond her control, and Darren, through trust and blind loyalty, had been pulled into it too. Whatever happened next, Darren realized, wasn't about reclaiming a lost life. It was about uncovering how deep the damage really went, and whether it could still be undone. Darren left the parking lot with more questions than answers. Elise's story didn't fully add up, but he couldn't ignore the fear in her voice or the exhaustion written across her face. He didn't know if she was a victim, an accomplice, or both. But one thing was clear. Someone else had been pulling strings behind the scenes, and that someone had taken everything. He began searching for Vincent Lowe. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Darren recalled it from a casual mention Elise had made years ago. She had once told him Vincent was an ex who had died in a motorcycle crash long before she met Darren. It was an offhand comment at the time, something he never thought to question. Now, it seemed like a carefully placed lie. With the help of a private investigator, Darren uncovered a trail. Vincent hadn't died. He had simply disappeared from public view. Over the years, he had changed aliases, moved between cities, and maintained a low profile. Still, digital fingerprints lingered. Hotel bookings, luxury car rentals, first-class flights, all paid for through accounts tied to Elise during Darren's time in prison. The timeline told its own story. Shortly after Darren's sentencing, Vincent re-emerged, quietly but confidently. He and Elise had traveled together, spent money freely, and lived under false names in Las Vegas, Denver, and eventually Los Angeles. The money wasn't just being spent, it was being laundered. Art galleries, shell corporations, crypto wallets, and offshore accounts. Darren had been methodically erased from his own wealth, but somewhere along the way, the spending stopped. Vincent vanished again, this time completely. Darren's investigator couldn't track any new movements after mid-2021. No travel logs, no purchases, not even a parking ticket. It was as if Vincent had evaporated. Darren became consumed by the mystery. He kept digging, losing sleep, spiraling deeper into old records and encrypted files he still had access to. That S when he found something that made his stomach turn. An email thread buried in a forgotten backup drive. It wasn't between Elise and Vincent. It was between Vincent and someone named Rico, referencing Darren's accounts and the timeline of asset transfers. The language was coded, but clear enough. They'd planned it. The arrest, the isolation, the siphoning of funds. Darren hadn't just been a victim of bad business decisions. He had been targeted. Elise's relationship with him hadn't been just romance. It had been strategy. The trust, the power of attorney, the house, all of it had been carefully orchestrated. But if that was true, something had gone wrong. If Elise was part of the con, why was she now living in her car, alone and terrified? Where was the payoff? Where was Vincent? Darren went back to Elise again. This time, she wouldn't open the car door. She saw him approach and simply stared, unmoving. Her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She wasn't just hiding from the past, she was hiding from people who wanted her gone. That night, Darren made a choice. He couldn't fix what was broken, but he could expose the truth. He sent the email thread to a contact in law enforcement, along with everything he had learned. He expected it to lead to a quiet investigation. Instead, it triggered something bigger. 2 weeks later, Vincent Lowe's name appeared in the news, for the first time in years. But not in the way Darren expected. He was dead. Found behind a warehouse in Nevada. 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. No ID. No phone. The body was identified through fingerprints on file from a minor arrest a decade earlier. Police called it an execution. No suspects. No surveillance footage. No signs of struggle. Elise disappeared the same day. Her car was found abandoned near the California border, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. In the glove compartment was a folded piece of paper with 4 handwritten words. He knows. I'm sorry. Darren didn't know if it was meant for him or someone else, but either way, he knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. The discovery of Vincent Lowe's body sent a ripple through Darren's already shattered world. Despite everything he'd uncovered, despite the betrayal, the lies, and the theft, Darren had never imagined it would end in murder. The warehouse where Vincent was found was in an industrial part of North Las Vegas, a place known more for silence than witnesses. No cameras, no neighbors, no clues. Just a cold body and 2 clean shots, one to the chest, one to the head. Execution style. The police report was brief, almost sterile. They had no leads, no suspects, just speculation. Vincent had clearly made enemies, And judging by how clean the job was, they weren't amateurs. The detective Darren eventually spoke with believed it was a message, not just a killing. Vincent had either crossed someone too powerful or outlived his usefulness. Either way, it was final. What stunned Darren more was Elise's disappearance. One moment she was a ghost of a woman living out of a Civic in a Walmart parking lot. The next, she was gone. No one had seen her leave. No one reported anything strange. The Civic was found 2 days later, near a gas station off a desolate stretch of highway heading west, close to the California state line. It was unlocked, untouched, eerily quiet. Inside was a suitcase of clothes, 2 nearly empty water bottles, a wallet with no cash or ID, and the note. The 4 words, "He knows. I'm sorry," were scrawled in shaky handwriting on a torn piece of notepad paper. No name, no explanation, just a final whisper before vanishing into the unknown. Darren couldn't tell if the note was meant for him or for someone else entirely. Maybe it was both. A warning, an apology, a goodbye. He would never know for sure. The aftermath was messy, but not in the way most stories like this end. There were no arrests, no trials, no dramatic confrontations, just silence. The $2 million was never recovered. Every trace of the money had been buried in layers of crypto transactions and dead-end accounts overseas. The house had long since been sold to a holding company that didn't to return phone calls and didn't to respond to legal challenges. Darren's life, as it once existed, was permanently gone. Yet there was no relief, no justice, no clear ending, only unanswered questions. Where did Elise go? Did she flee on her own, or was she taken? Was her disappearance part of a deeper plan, or the final act of a woman who had lost everything? Did she know what would happen to Vincent? Was she trying to escape the same fate? Darren replayed these questions over and over, but answers never came. He moved out of Phoenix not long after. The city held too many ghosts, too many memories that couldn't be scrubbed clean. He settled in a quiet town under a different name, took a job with a local tech firm, and began rebuilding. Not a life of wealth or recognition, but a life where he could wake up and not feel like everything was a lie. Sometimes he wondered if Elise had really loved him, even in the smallest way. Maybe she had. Maybe that's why she left the note. Maybe that was her way of trying to make something right in the end. Or maybe she had just been trying to save herself until there was no place left to run. Darren never looked for her again. He knew better. People like Elise either disappeared because they wanted to, or because someone made sure they did. And Vincent's death? It never made national news. Just a short paragraph in a local paper. Another nameless casualty in a long line of quiet crimes no one cared enough to solve. As for Darren, he lived on, carrying the weight of a past that would never fully let go. Not because he wanted to remember, but because he could not forget how quickly everything he trusted had turned to dust.